Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not leaving eyeballs out in the woods for old men to find...
He wanted me to have this.
I'm here at the Wolfula, reviewing movies. It's been about a minute since the last time I talked about a Friday the 13th movie, so I might as well talk about another one. Friday the 13th Part 3. In 3D. That's right, it's a 3D horror movie. And it was made in the 80s, which means most of the 3D is spent on wooden poles being raised toward the camera. Ah, holy shit! Oh, sorry, I thought he was gonna hit me with that fucking thing. Where was I? Friday the 13th Part 3 is, as the title suggests, the third part in the Friday the 13th series, starring the machete-slinging, bag-wearing killer Jason Voorhees. Well, the bag-wearing part might not be so true after Part 3, but hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Also, Part 3 is the second outing for famed horror sequel director Steve Miner, the only director to direct more than one Friday the 13th film, years before he directed Soul Man, the most racist film since the birth of a nation.
Go get my heroin and my hypodermic needle, bitch. Give me some more watermelon while you're at it.
Yes, dear.
White fat-ass slut.
Friday the 13th Part 3 ditches Crystal Lake and the camp counselors, instead opting toward the Scooby-Doo approach. Quote-unquote teenagers heading towards an isolated location in a van that encounter a masked man terrorizing the surrounding area. Though sans mask for much of the film, the masked man in this case is Jason Voorhees, the man-child murderer that didn't quite drown as a kid in Crystal Lake that continues his mother's killing spree against people in general, not just camp counselors anymore. This is the first Friday the 13th movie that says, fuck it, and ignores Jason's backstory and underlying motivations, leaving him as a guy who just kills anybody he meets. Jason's name is never even said in this movie. In fact, Part 3 takes place a day after Part 2, making this whole movie start on Saturday the 14th and end on Monday the 16th, technically. Saturday the 14th through Monday the 16th is not as catchy of a title, I must admit, but they could have taken greater care in making sure that the title of their film fundamentally made sense and not did the whole Halloween 2 thing where a sequel picks up just a wee bit after the previous flick. Friday the 13th Part 3 goes full ante on aping Halloween 2's opening. Part 3 spends its first 5 minutes with a recap of Part 2 by just showing the end of Part 2 with only one new shot tying it to Part 3. After this, we have a wanted killer sneaking around somebody's property as a news report plays describing his previous exploits.
Bodies were found literally strewn over the 4-square-mile campground in the remote lake region.
Sound familiar?
Police are searching the entire area for a mental patient who escaped last night from the Smiths Grovewarn County Sanitarium. He is now believed to be at large in Haddonfield.
Although, to be fair, Part 3 was originally going to be even more of a Halloween 2 ripoff by following Ginny from Part 2 as she's admitted to a mental hospital and is tracked down by Jason, but Amy Steele wouldn't sign on to that bullshit.
Second act needs work.
You know, if you listen closely, the news segment in the opening mentions that Jason engaged in cannibalism and sexual mutilation. I don't quite remember any of that happening in Part 2, but then again, we still don't know what happened to Paul. Shit, man, Paul got the worst of it.
Where's Paul?
The opening with Harold, the general store owner, and his bitchy wife Edna don't serve much of a purpose beyond allowing the audience to live vicariously through a guy who can eat all the products in his store and, of course, testing the 3D with the most mundane shit. Oh, come on, you can see the fucking string on that snake. Well, at least they didn't feel the urge to show the inside of this dude's toilet in 3D. It could always be worse. Damn enchiladas. Okay, enough of the shitting in outhouses scenes. Let's get to the core cast of characters. God damn it, seriously? This Friday the 13th film has more shitting in outhouses scenes than sex scenes. Speaking of which, if you're looking for nudity in this particular film, look elsewhere. There's nudity, but only for one character, and this was still the early point where Friday the 13th movies were shy about showing the goods. Most of the time, Debbie's merchandise is out of frame, and I can only imagine this being a deliberate choice on the part of a nervous camera operator. Oh, what's the point of writing in the cliched shower scene if you don't get to see anything? Also, who wears pearls in the shower anyway? Okay, I'm getting really sidetracked here, but it's not like there's much of a story to talk about in a Friday the 13th flick anyway. Like I was saying, Part 3 centers around a group of high school students? College students? It's difficult to gauge with a Friday the 13th movie. I mean, you have the jock dude with the nerdiest, whiniest sounding voice ever, and you think, high schoolers, sure.
Now, I got your date, didn't I? Didn't I?
Yeah.
So don't embarrass me.
But then you have the couple in the group who look like a hetero-romantic Cheech and Chong ripoff added in to pander to stoners, and you just can't tell what this group is supposed to be. Ho-ho! Passing a joint in 3D. What will they think of next? How do these people know each other, though? No clue. I'll tell you what I do know. Chris Higgins and her friends are headed to her family retreat, Higgins Haven. If you're 11, this is a map from a video game you might have played. I need to make these videos relevant to the youngins out there. Some of these characters do have a bit of backstory and individual plot threads going for them. Like, for instance, Andy's roommate Shelley is a dateless wonder.
Just relax. Be yourself.
Would you be yourself if you look like this?
I don't understand why, with the Jufro and everything. Oh, and that run, too. With that kind of run, you'd think Shelley would be beating them off with a stick by now. So, Andy decides to set Shelley up over the weekend with Vera, and he makes a good first impression by wearing a serial killer mask.
You're Shelley?
Sorry.
You're killing it, bro. She's all over you, Shelley. Friday the 13th Part 3 is one of the most iconic entries in the series, but it's also a particularly lazy entry, even by Friday the 13th standards. It's the chapter where the series really fell into a safe formula without doing a whole lot new, where it's just the continued adventures of Jason Voorhees killing a new group of people and revisiting old ideas. Part 2 might have killed off Crazy Ralph, but apparently there's plenty of crazy hermits around Crystal Lake, as Part 3 falls back on the staples by having the gang encounter and gawk at a rapier Crazy Ralph lying in the middle of the road.
You are indeed, all of you, kind and generous young people. Look upon what his grace has brought unto me.
Oh, he also has an eyeball, I guess.
I have warned thee.
Yeah, when I see shots like a van passing by some roadkill, I can't help but draw some comparisons to classics like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Rest in peace, Toby Hooper. Part 3 just feels like a sharp decrease in quality from Part 2, which had a pretty varied cast and a strong lead in Ginny. Part 3's protagonist is Chris, who's just there. That's not to say that Part 3 doesn't have its charms. I mean, it's a fucking 3D movie that, when it saw video release, was not available in 3D for many years, so you wind up with the unintentional comedy of seeing a yo-yo awkwardly coming at you in thrilling 2D. And then there's Shelley, played by Larry Zerner, who really probably should be the main character of Part 3. The movie focuses a disproportionate amount of its runtime to Shelley, and after all, he's depicted as an outsider, an underdog. Shelley is the only really sympathetic character in this movie that we actually know much of anything about. Shelley sees himself as an actor who loves theatricality and movie makeup, who uses his skills to frighten his pals at the cabin, but it's treated as a war crime.
Asshole.
Oh, what a fun bunch. When the group actually reaches the cabin, the film still tracks Shelley's and Vera's relationship progress as everybody else is doing boring shit, like Chris and her boy toy Rick doing barn work. Really entertaining stuff. Shelley and Vera head off to a convenience store together, but not the one where Jason killed those people. Different one. Apparently, it's all the way near Green Valley, New Jersey, even. Anyway, Shelley and Vera are harassed by a trio of bikers.
Excuse me, but I believe that's my wallet.
Of course the first two black characters in the Friday the 13th series are criminals. Who would expect anything different?
I'll take that now.
Is this your rubber?
Shelley and Vera make it out of the convenience store just long enough for Shelley to accidentally back up their bug into the bikers' motorcycles. Oh no, they're gonna have to dance to tequila to get out of this situation. Ollie, chain in hand, approaches the two, but the man actually seems quite reasonable about the mishap.
Now, this is an old black trick. Really, I didn't want to talk. I was gonna fuck them up. So, if you're ever caught in traffic and a black guy starts saying he just want to talk to you, don't open the door, nigga. Even if he's me, smiling at you.
After everything they've been through, with Vera warming up to Shelley over the course of the film, you'd think Shelley and Vera would finally hit it off, right? Nope!
I was thinking that maybe, we could...
I don't think so.
Shelley and Vera's relationship ends with an anticlimax instead of a climax. Okay, whatever, I guess.
Sure. We'll talk. Bitch.
It's a bit of a reality check in a movie where a woman is shot in the head with a spear gun and isn't immediately knocked down from the impact. Oh yeah, Jason's in this movie. Jason spends most of the runtime hiding out inside the barn next to Higgins Haven. It's not totally clear why Jason is hanging out in the barn to begin with. Maybe if it was established that the police were actively searching for him, it makes sense, but he spends a lot of time just chilling out for no good reason. To tide people over looking for some murder, the bikers wander into the barn while siphoning fuel from the white kids, and Jason gets his kill on, but it doesn't feel like old Jay's putting much effort into killing people. Chris and Rick split up from the group and hang out in the woods for a bit, but even with this golden opportunity, Jason still just fucking chills at Higgins Haven. Jason's like a camper in Call of Duty. While Chris and Rick are away, it does give Chris an opportunity to explain why she's so on edge about returning to her family's cabin, which is also the only bit of Jason background that the movie's gonna give you.
I want you to know what happened so you'll understand.
Through Dana Kimmel's stilted monologue, Chris says that she ran away from the cabin one night after a fight with her folks, and then takes a snooze cruise under a tree. Unsurprisingly, she's attacked by a weirdo in the woods.
He was so grotesque, he was almost inhuman.
This weirdo was Jason, who looks entirely different from Part 2. No overalls, doesn't wear a bag on his head, and is missing his mangy locks of hair, looking more like the Tom Savini original. This was the first point when continuity was totally thrown out the window in the Friday the 13th series. It's implied that during Chris's encounter with Jason that he might have, raped her. I know I'm gonna get a bunch of people saying that that's not what happened, that's not Jason's thing, and it is one of the most hotly debated topics in the series.
I blacked out. I don't know what happened after that, I just don't know.
Keep in mind, Part 3 was still early on in the series, and they were obviously still trying to figure out what Jason was, so it's just this weird thing in Jason's backstory that contradicts the later versions of the character we've grown familiar with. This was before Jason got his hockey mask, after all. At least until Jason met Shelley. Shelley brought along a small case containing what he called his whole world.
What do you got in there?
My whole world.
And that little thing?
Stick around. You'll see.
Apparently, his whole world consists of a wetsuit, a spear gun, and a hockey mask. But whose isn't? Jason winds up borrowing the mask from Shelley, and he's been wearing a hockey mask ever since. As for the wetsuit, wasn't really Jason's style. The real reason why Jason wears a piece of hockey equipment is because the effects team needed to create a replacement for the bag that was difficult for Part 2's Jason stuntman Steve Dash to see through. So, during a lighting test, the effects crew just half-assedly put a Red Wings hockey mask belonging to the 3D effects supervisor Martin J. Sadoff and called it a day. Steve Miner happened to like the placeholder mask, so the crew made a larger, modified version of Sadoff's mask with more air holes and those distinctive red chevrons, and a horror star was born. In the end, the hockey mask that made Jason an icon to this day was just an afterthought. It changed the world, but it wasn't on purpose. Oh, speaking of Steve Dash, Part 2's Jason, well, he doesn't play Jason in this flick. Part 3 started the long tradition of alternating adult Jason actors because the film shot in California in order to have access to the 3D effects experts that would help the crew figure out how to make popcorn work in the third dimension, and Steve Dash would have had to pay his own way to get to the West Coast in order to play Jason again. So fuck it. Jason is instead played by the late English stuntman Richard Brooker, and he did a bang-up job as Jason. Brooker's Jason has a sort of disinterested fuck-it personality to him, like he's just killing people to pass the time. Jason's kills in Part 3 are, of course, geared towards the 3D gimmick to mixed results. There are a lot of fun, memorable kills, but usually for the wrong reasons. The murders are much more ridiculous and over-the-top with sketchier-looking effects. Like Rick's head getting crushed and his eye clearly being pulled by a string. What the fuck's up with this movie and strings? Classic, but because it looks so dumb. Some of the stunts in Part 3 are pretty crazy though, and I'm surprised nobody pulled a Brandon Lee in this movie. The suspenseful scenes in Part 3 also feel like there wasn't much effort put in. Like when Shelley here, yes, that's her name, knows there have been some killings happening, so she just sort of slowly jogs around the cabin for a bit in a mostly static shot. There's no intensity at all, even with the intense music in the background. Speaking of music, Harry Manfredini returns once again to score Part 3, and it's the same old classic sound expected from the franchise up to this point, but with one notable addition. The opening theme of Part 3 is some sort of weird disco-inspired take on the classic theme that plays over some really cheesy-looking 3D credits and fog. This is a change of pace from the much more intense openings of the previous two films, what with a fucking exploding title in Part 2, and it could be an acknowledgement from the creators that Part 3 isn't gonna be a totally serious horror movie. It's a spooky horror movie, but it's also kinda funky. Alrighty, spoiler time! Don't want the end of this formulaic slasher sequel spoiled? Skip to the 3D time code for my final thoughts and check back later. Just like in life, eventually everybody dies. Well, not everybody, but almost everybody. Even Debbie isn't safe, even though she's briefly mentioned to be pregnant.
Would have been there already if some people didn't have to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes.
That's what happens when you're pregnant.
Nope, while Debbie chills in a hammock reading a Fangoria mag, Jason kills her and the unborn child. Savage as fuck! It's weird to think that Jason was just ducking underneath a hammock without being seen. So, Chris is the last girl standing in this horror flick. Unfortunately. I would have taken fucking Shelley over Chris. The final act is kind of a retread of stuff from the last couple of movies, like Rick being thrown through the window a la the original. Looks like Jason wasn't tricked by his mom's sweater this time around. Chris's chase scene is a bit boring because there's little sense of urgency. Plus, Jason just seems a little incompetent when he actually has to chase somebody. Okay, I have to admit, that was a cheap shot. Jason does show an early sign of his extreme resistance to death when the chase leads to the barn and Chris manages to hang the guy, yet he still survives that shit. You know, Jason may be a killer, but unmasked, he sure does look like a jolly fellow. Ollie also shows his resistance to death, only to have Jason remind him that black people never survive Friday the 13th movies, unless they're a kid with a cute nickname. Chris catches Jason off guard and just whacks him in the forehead with an axe, leaving Jason stunned and allowing Chris to call Tommy Jarvis— no wait, this is a movie, not the video game. Never mind. Yeah, so Part 3 just says fuck it and has Chris take a nap in a canoe for some reason. Just like in the original. Gotta throw in more retread. Chris sees that Jason is alive and happy to see her, but then he disappears. Only to have his mother pop out of the lake as a zombie. Doesn't really make sense since she didn't drown and all, but whatever. It's just a dream. Does Jason have, like, Freddy Krueger powers or something? He sure does appear in a lot of dreams. So Chris is alive and well, but insane, shrieking and giggling to herself like she's a Twitch streamer. And Jason? Well, he's dead, I guess. Why haven't the police set up a crime scene over here? There's actually a long-lost alternate ending shot where Jason decapitates Chris. Oh, what could have been. I guess they decided that they couldn't do the opposite version of the original's ending 100% and have it still make sense. So that was Friday the 13th Part 3, an important entry that cemented the series' formula for good or ill and gave Jason his iconic look. It's a fun little slasher flick, but plays it way too safe and feels like it's both held back by its 3D gimmick and focuses too much attention on 3D gags. Having to shoot for 3D seemed to have limited the shots that the crew could manage, leading to some boring chase scenes and cheesy-looking kills. I give Friday the 13th Part 3 a 3D snake out of a 3D eyeball. Now you can take off your 3D glasses. Oh, you weren't wearing 3D glasses this whole time? Too bad, you missed out on some cool shit.
This is all the exercise I need.